Stay in that great state. We'll skip across Corio Bay to Geelong and catch up again with Liberal Senator Sarah Henderson. Sarah, I'm pretty keen to catch up with you again. You sent me some material where you're saying that what's actually is unfolding in Victoria, particularly with this curfew, is in breach of human rights obligations.
Well, Chris, good afternoon. And yes, that's my assessment. I'm the Parliamentary Joint Committee Chair of the Human Rights Committee, and I'm not speaking in that capacity. But as a Senator for Victoria, it's my assessment that this curfew is in breach and serious breach of human rights. Now, of course, we have different human rights. We have the right to liberty and free movement. We also have the right to health and the right to life. And the right to freedom of movement can be limited if it's justifiable. And the bottom line is there's no rational objective for this curfew. There's no health rationale and there is no request by the police. So it's quite clear on the evidence before all Victorians that this is completely improper. It is a serious breach of human rights in my view. I've made initial contact with the Human Rights Commission and raised this and my concerns with them. But look, frankly, this is really alarming. This is tantamount to a police state. The Premier must immediately revoke this curfew and really very, very urgently consider these restrictions, which are absolutely driving thousands of businesses off the cliff at the moment, Chris. It really is dreadfully concerning.
But Daniel Andrews said at his press conference today that he couldn't even remember when the idea came up, who suggested it first. You know, we've got the Chief Medical Officer saying they had nothing to do with it, the police saying they had nothing to do with it. Daniel Andrews trying to say the unprecedented step of a Premier locking down the second biggest city in this country under a curfew, and he can't even remember when they took this decision or how.
Well, Chris, it's just unbelievable, and it's actually really hard to believe what the Premier is saying. What I do know and what all Victorians know is that any Melburnian living in the greater metropolitan region has been placed in home detention.
Yep.
I mean, this is unprecedented. And now that we know that there is no health rationale, now that we know the police did not request this, and I also feel dreadfully sorry for the police, this is megalomania out of control, but it is a very, very serious breach on its face of human rights, and it needs to go today.
Now,
I really do think that the Premier's role as the Premier of this state is on the line if he does not act immediately.
Oh, he has to. I don't understand how his cabinet and his colleagues can support him. A bloke who's put a curfew on his state without any advice, without any input. It's basically Daniel Andrews' curfew. It is extraordinary. Now, Sarah Henderson, we have a large human rights apparatus in this country, all sorts of non-government organisations and government-funded organisations like the Australian Human Rights Commission. They are willing to slam governments left, right and centre if they're coalition governments usually. Yet why don't we hear from them about the human rights of Victorians? Why don't we hear from them about a woman not being able to go to her father's funeral or an expectant mother refused medical equipment? Where are all these Australian human rights activists who are completely silent on the ways people's rights are being trashed here?
Well, Chris, I have spoken with the President of the Human Rights Commission and she has certainly expressed her concerns and they're considering these matters. But the bottom line is, in relation to Victorian restrictions, they don't have the jurisdiction. But I agree with you. There are some gross breaches of human rights. Even the pregnant woman who is handcuffed in her own home. I mean, that just seems on its face to be completely wrong. And as for this dreadful story of Sarah in Queensland, who could not be at her father's funeral, and the arrogance of the Queensland Premier. I mean, for any Queenslander watching your show now, why would you vote Labor in Queensland? I mean, it is absolutely appalling, and it is becoming more and more serious by the day, Chris.
Thanks so much for joining us again, Senator.
Yeah, great to talk to you, Chris.
Sarah Henderson. Now, I tell you what, you've got to call these people out. All these human rights advocates and commissioners, Tim Soutphommasey, Julian Burnside, every ABC journo you've ever heard of, every Green politician, Christina Keneally, the whole list of them that bash Australia day after day after day, complaining about human rights this, human rights this. But when Australian women are refused medical care, when an Australian woman can't go to her father's funeral, when Victorians are locked down for 3 months in their own home on the whim of a premier, the whole lot of them fall silent. They don't want to criticise the left. Pathetic.